Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Whitney Tucker, and I am Research Director here at NC Child. And we are sponsoring this webinar in partnership with our friends at NALEO to cover some of the background around relevant changes that have happened to the census since the 2010 census, how those will impact Latino communities in particular, and then also some messaging that's been found to be effective to really help families to understand the importance of the census and to fill out and return their census forms. We'll also be rounding out this webinar with some on-the-ground reflections from our friend Lilleana with the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission to really hear a little bit more about what it looks like to do work in promoting the census with families on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I know that you all's time is valuable, and I want to go ahead and get started because there's a lot to cover. Again, my name is Whitney Tucker. I am Research Director at NC Child. At NC Child, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy advocacy organization that works on issues that impact children and families. We really try to build a strong North Carolina by advancing public policies that ensure all children, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or place of birth, have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. We know that that can take a lot of forms, and so we have focused our work in the areas that you see below. Unlike a lot of other child advocacy organizations, we don't work primarily within one area or the other. We really pivot as the political situation demands it or as these lived experiences of children and their families do. So if an issue comes up that is affecting a lot of kids or affecting some kids really disproportionately, we focus on that issue regardless of whether it's an issue around health, around their education, around their family's economic security, so on and so forth. We do our work in 4 primary ways. The first is through research and data analysis, which is mostly my job. We write issue briefs, fact sheets, reports, and also manage the North Carolina Kids Count data program, where we make more than 200 indicators of child well-being available for free online at the Kids Count Data Center. And I can talk about that more at the end of the show today if you all have questions about where to access some of that data about kids and families. We also engage in strategic communications work by hosting things like this webinar, but also by writing op-eds, letters to the editor, and helping affected folks to write those things themselves also. We engage in direct advocacy and some lobbying and meet directly with legislators to talk about the things that are impacting kids and families and ways that public policies can be created or altered to better support families. And then we also have a community engagement branch that goes out to listen to folks and to learn from them and to work to come up with better ways to address local issues as well. We have a community engagement network that we call the CAN, which is Child Advocacy Network. And the CAN has some hubs across the state where you can get involved in more localized work that then informs our statewide public policy agenda. And you can find out more about all of that on our website at ncchild.org if you're interested. Now, all of that said, we work across all those issue areas and with all of these different strategies, and the census has really risen to the top of the pile when it comes to the issues that we want to focus on because it impacts all of these different ways that children and families are supported in our communities. The census was mandated into existence in our Constitution. It's in Article 1, Section 2, and you may have heard of it referred to as the decennial census because it is conducted every 10 years. And the count is really to have a metric of how many people are living in the United States. So regardless of citizenship status, who is here, and then use that to inform a process that's called apportionment, whereby the country really divvies up representation in Congress based on population size. Now, there, as you can see in the text here from the Constitution, there were some early changes that had to be made things like how to count American Indians, how to count Black people at the time, most were slaves, et cetera, et cetera. But the overarching theme has remained the same, and the census still really remains the most important and impactful way in our country that we apportion power among the states and among the people. So because of that, I say that census data are the basis of our representative democracy, and that they're critical to the protection of civil rights because they tell us where people are living, they tell us who is living there, and then they tell us what sort of power they have to speak up for themselves as a result of that. In addition to representation in Congress, the census count is also used to inform the annual distribution of billions of dollars in federal funds. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how those are parceled out within North Carolina in a minute. But all of that not only informs programs, but it informs what sort of programs and other local funding decisions we should be making. Because, for example, if you find that an area has a large number of young children, we might need more childcare centers, or a growing number of family units. They might want to establish a grocery store. And the census helps businesses to make those sort of decisions. Now, Census 2020 is going to be a little bit different from some of the censuses that we've had in the past. There are significant changes that have been proposed and followed up on since Census 2010, and that many people, including many Latino families, are still not very fully aware of. First, the overarching theme is that this census is expected to be cheaper than censuses before it, which has really put a strain on the Census Bureau's resources as we've started to prepare and plan for Census Day, which is April 1st, 2020. The Census Bureau was mandated to conduct the 2020 census at a lower cost per household than it did in 2010, and those plans have fallen short for a myriad of reasons. Some of which have been that the internet response now is a primary option, but the Census Bureau, in trying to cut costs, has been unable to test that fully and figure out what that impact will be on different communities. And so they've been trying to sort of pick up the slack in communities at the last minute. The internet response issue is obviously relevant in areas where there might be no Wi-Fi access, but also areas of low access will be impacted by this. And then also people who are just unfamiliar with the census at all, particularly new immigrants, might feel intimidated by the internet portion. And there is still the option to answer the census via paper form, but many people aren't aware of that. And also, if they receive that paper form after not responding via the internet link, then they will have follow-up by a census enumerator, which can be very intimidating for families to have someone actually show up at their door to ask more questions about who lives in the household. The Census Bureau has also been dealing with a reduction in the number of local census offices and field staff and their general field presence with those enumerators and door knockers because they were trying to cut costs. And then there's also the fact that there's been a redesign of questions about Hispanic origin and race to try and actually get more robust information about people's ethnic backgrounds and nationalities before they might have come to the United States, but that can be off-putting or confusing to folks who've never seen it before. Now, all of this becomes more important when we look at North Carolina's rapidly changing demographics. The total population in the state is just about 10.4 million people, and it's 64% white. Now, for comparison, the child population in North Carolina is just over 2.4 million people, and only 54% white. This will be relevant in a second when we talk about hard-to-count communities. Another relevant fact is that of all the children in the state, fully 1/4 of them, so over 600,000, are under age 5. In terms of population trends, the fastest growing population in the state is Hispanic Latino children born to North Carolina resident parents or to US born parents who migrated to North Carolina from other states. From 2010 to just 2016, the US Census Bureau estimated that North Carolina's Hispanic population grew by 132,000 new residents, which represented a 16.5% increase. Latino children now account for 18% of children in North Carolina under the age of 5. This is important because it means that the 2020 census is going to be the first in which the state can really capture the magnitude of our young Latino population growth. And that's going to be really difficult because children under age 5 and Hispanic and Latino children accounted for 2 of the top 3 populations with the highest net undercount rates in the previous census, which I'm going to talk through in our next slide. If North Carolina is going to receive its due share of congressional representation and financial resources from the federal government, the state is going to need to take significant steps ahead of 2020 to reach Latino families in particular. So this chart is giving you an overview of just some of the largest demographic groups in our country. So looking at race and ethnicity, looking at gender, owners versus renters, because that's very relevant when we're talking about a census count, because it's essentially people who are more likely to move often and those who don't, right? And all of this is showing the net undercount rates of those groups from the last census. The undercount rates are determined by the Census Bureau based on their estimates from other data sources. So things like birth and death records, immigration records, and then also things like the American Community Survey, where it has a very large sample size, but unlike the census, it can't actually count for every single family and thus has to rely on a sort of estimate of the population size. They put all of that together and then compare it to the actual counts that come in through the census to determine about how many people were likely missed. And when they do that, they see that Hispanic people were the 3rd most likely group to have not been counted in 2010, and that young children of any racial or ethnic background had a higher net undercount rate by far than any other demographic group in the last census. Since 1980, in fact, the net undercount of young children in the census, while coverage of older children and adults has actually improved. There we go. Now, among young children, Hispanic children are the least likely to be counted. It's estimated that more than 25,000 young children in North Carolina were not counted in the 2010 census. Independent researchers have actually said that if those children had been counted, North Carolina would likely have already received an additional seat in Congress. If we're able to count them in 2020, we're likely to receive that seat just based on population growth and possibly even a second. Of all the young children who were missed in the 2010 count, more than 1/3 of them, so 9,000 kids, were Latino. Also, I will note here that Black is also non-Hispanic Black. They specifically note that in the census data site, but it's just relevant for those who might be curious about Afro-Latino populations. I've also included on this chart a line that shows you the undercount rate for all young children, so of any background. You see that's that 4.6, and then Hispanic children is nearly twice that. Now, North Carolina's young Latino population disproportionately lives in areas with characteristics that make them difficult for the U.S. Census Bureau to count. Hard to count census tracts are those with mail-in response rates of less than 73% during the last census. And that may sound relatively high, but that's really in about the bottom 20% of respondents for the country. Now, an estimated 17.2% of our state's Hispanic population currently lives in hard-to-count census tracts. Previous census results have shown that young children, children of color, low-income children, and children in immigrant families are all at high risk of being undercounted. Latino children are represented in large numbers across these groups, and if they're missed in the count, they stand to suffer significantly from reductions in funding to vital children's programs. In addition, an undercount of young Latino children would also equate to huge reductions in federal funding for more general needs statewide, like Medicare Part B payments and highway planning and construction work. This under-resourcing is just the consequence of being hard to count, along with the loss of power in the form of political representation. I've put a chart here on the slide for your reference of just 10 of the largest child serving programs in the state and how much money George Washington University has estimated has come into North Carolina per year for those programs as a result of the census count. And this is just for child serving programs. So for example, Medicaid obviously serves a larger population than just children, but singling out just the portion that, that does serve children, we get $1.9 billion just from that alone, based on our ability to count kids. And it's important to note that while the net undercount of young children is incredibly high, you saw from that earlier slide that it's higher than for all other demographic groups, their omission rate on the census is even higher. So it's 10.3% compared to that earlier 4.6%. That means that not only are many young children in our state not being counted, primarily in hard to count communities, but even in families that are submitting their census forms, they're being left off. We see that families are returning forms of information about other household members and leaving off young children that the Census Bureau knows is very likely to live in that household. So understanding why Latino families may be hesitant to respond to the census and to include all household members, including young children, is really critical to ensuring an accurate count in April. And so to that end, it is now my pleasure to patch in Juliana Cabrales with NALEO Educational Fund to tell you about recent messaging work that's been done to understand some effective messages to encourage Latino families to complete and return their census forms in 2020. Give me just a second to switch over controls to Juliana.
Thank you, Whitney. Hi, everyone. This is Juliana Cabrales with NALEO Educational Fund. I serve as Mid-Atlantic Director of Civic Engagement for the organization. I'm actually based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. So hopefully for all of you that are based here in the state, we might have interacted in prior settings before. So for those of you that might not be familiar with NALEO Educational Fund, we're a national organization that focuses on encouraging Latinos to be active in the American political process. Our main office is in LA, but we have regional offices across that nation. And through those regional offices and staff we've brought on board, we're really focusing on Census 2020 efforts with hopes that folks, the Latino community will participate next year. Whitney, I think, there we go. Perfect. So this slide really just emphasizes many of the points Whitney just touched on, how very young children are most likely to be excluded from the census count, how the majority of those very young children are children that are Latino. And then also we just wanted to emphasize a point that Whitney shared, that we know that Latino families that completed the census questionnaire in 2010, for reasons we don't know, left off very young children. So as an organization, we embarked on a research phase in the spring of last year with the goal of identifying effective messages that would encourage Latino families to participate in the census and to include their very young children. So what we did is we did a national poll, which was the nationally representative sample of adult Latino population. We surveyed a total of 1,600 Latinos. And then we assigned participants, poll participants, into 4 treatment groups and a control group to test message. And so when we dive into the findings, I'll share with you what those 4 messages were. We also conducted 4 focus groups. 2 of those took place actually here in Charlotte, North Carolina on May 8th of last year. And the second set took place in May 9th in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. We have 40 participants in each of these in 2 locations, so each group around roughly 10 individuals, and you can see on the slide the breakdown of those groups. So a really good sample of what the Latino population looks like in the United States, a combination of U.S. citizens, non-U.S. citizens, individuals that had both parents born outside the United States or might themselves be naturalized. Only 5 participants in total had both parents born in the United States. So when we started to do this work, we knew that the undercount of children was an issue. And so we asked individuals that both completed the survey and the focus groups questions revolving around who lived in their household. And we found that 53% of the survey respondents stated that they had one or more children aged 17 and younger in the household. And among those respondents with someone aged 17 and younger in the home, 11% said they would not count them or did not know if they would include them in a census. When it came to households with children under the age of 4, 24% of survey respondents stated that they had one or more children under the age of 4. And among those respondents, 50% said that they would not count them or did not know if they would. So if you know, for households that had children 17 and younger, 11% said they would not count them or did not know if they would. That percentage went slightly up when it was a household that identified having children under the age of 4. So when we talked to individuals, whether it was in the focus group setting or in the poll, what we did is we shared with them different messages. And we had a message that talked about the census being convenient, safe, and required. And that one actually showed the most positive response among households with children under age 17, who said that they would not include kids on the census. Among households that had children under the age of 4, who said that they would not include kids on the census, were most responsive to a message around resistance. One that spoke about standing up for the community and resisting to the attacks on it by participating on the census. So slightly different findings there with the different groups we discussed. In addition to that, through the focus group, we found that when we started to talk to individuals participating about the census, they had a generally positive view of the census. But when we actually showed them a version of the actual questionnaire, hesitation, fear, and lack of confidence arose. Survey respondents overwhelmingly expressed a preference to complete the census by mail or on paper. That was 75%. And we just like to emphasize that because, as Whitney shared earlier, the Bureau actually expects the majority of us to complete the census questionnaire online. In this specific research, in this survey, we found that individuals preferred to respond to the census by mail on a paper form. In addition to that, message around the census being convenient, safe, and required showed the most positive response in the survey. And in the focus groups, we found something slightly different. Messages about the role of census data in providing funding for local schools and community programs was the most effective. So slightly different there when it was in a focus group setting versus when it was on the survey. I think I need your help with the slides. Here we go. Okay, so we also noticed when we looked at individuals that participated, when we looked up subgroups, immigrant Latinos were especially responsive to the convenient, safety, and required message, with 75% of them saying they would definitely participate in response to this message. This is consistent with the serious privacy concerns we've heard from the community over and over. Women were most responsive to the message that touched on civic and community duty, 57% saying that they would participate in response to that message. And younger Latinos under the age of 40, were most responsive to the resistance message, with 53% saying they would definitely participate in response to that message. If you'll remember from an earlier slide, this was also the message was most effective in individuals that indicated that they had a young person in their household, so not surprising that it also gets mirrored when we talk about younger Latinos. What we also asked focus group participants and surveys participants to tell us a little bit more about who they considered as trusted messengers. Not surprisingly, family members were the most trusted messengers. So as we embark in this work, I encourage everyone to think about how we can mobilize family members as influencers in their households or in their family units. In addition to that, nurses, doctors, health providers, and Latino community organizations were trusted. People who spoke for children or the schools, such as teachers, were especially trusted and convincing. And then elected officials, we found, were among the least trusted as a reliable source of information. One thing I like to point out, particularly when I'm connecting with groups here in North Carolina, is that the local context is really important when you're considering your census planning or your census outreach and implementation. When we talk to focus groups participants in Charlotte, they all reference the December 2017 countywide data hack in discussing data security. And so in general, they were very hesitant to participate online because of that local experience. So we like to emphasize that it's really important that the messaging mirrors what's happening in the local community. And if there's concern about countywide hacks or issues around confidentiality, how that might impact participation online. So Whitney referenced this earlier. We are actually conducting some additional research. In the last couple of weeks, we actually conducted some additional focus groups in Portland, Oregon, and Atlanta, Georgia. We'll be conducting some additional ones here in North Carolina in December, along other places nationwide. And we've actually just gotten back some results on a another nationally representative poll of Latinos. So as this message, this testing gets finalized, happy to keep everyone in the loop of what we find and if there's any significant difference in what we found out through our research last year. To finalize my presentation, I quickly want to share with everyone on the webinar some details of our national census effort, national census campaign called Hágase Contar. As you can see on the slide, Hágase Contar stands for Make Yourself Count. And as an organization, we've really embarked on promoting this campaign nationwide, and through it really offer resources and materials that can be helpful for local communities, community leaders, and community organizations. We operate a bilingual hotline, 877-El-Censo, and we also have our hagasecontar.org, which is our website. Well, you'll find a lot of the resources listed on the slide. In addition to that, to specifically address the undercount of children, we have our Hazme Contar campaign, which is from a child's perspective, Make Me Count. And we actually rolled out some resources for the back to school period in the late summer that are also available online. And those include sample curriculum, template for presentation, template resolutions for school boards, and a lot of resources for communications or digital media efforts. So we're really trying to help with work with stakeholders at the national and local level to make sure that we're developing resources that are helpful. I think my last slide is simply an overview of our hotline. So without taking up any more time, I'll pass it over to Whitney, who I believe will introduce Lilleana.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I'm sorry, everyone, for the screen sharing back and forth. Looks like the technology has had enough of me. But also, it looks as if Lilleana has not been able to join us yet, which is unfortunate, but I'm hoping to be able to patch her in the next 5 minutes. But in the meantime, I do want to show you a slide that I was going to end on. And if she jumps in before then I will be sure to patch her through. But this is just a quick reference slide to tell you where you can get some more information about the undercount in the past, some of the information that I shared, about some tools that you can use, fact sheets, frequently asked questions, all kinds of things to help you to talk to families. Oh, here we go. And it looks like Lilleana is here. Just a moment. Let me figure out how to patch her in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Wonderful. Yes, I've been listening on through the entire time. So thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Sorry about that.
No problem. So if it's okay, then I'd like to go ahead and then share with you what we have been doing here in Ohio. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. And basically what we wanted to do is just share a little bit of the ground experience that we have had here in Ohio. And we know in many ways the dynamics of our community is quite similar to the ones that you're experiencing there. So we started working very early on, and I want to divide my short message in three areas. Number one, talking a little bit about the partners that we established on the ground. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the campaigns and how we have approached them. And third, I want to talk a little bit about the message. So I'll try to be very concise on this. Ohio has a fast growing Hispanic community. We are close to hitting now the 500,000 mark. It is diverse, as you probably know. We have a large amount of Latinos that are very well established who live in the upper third of the state. Cleveland, Lorain, Youngstown, Toledo. So those are people that are either of Puerto Rican descent or Mexican descent, and they have been in the state for a really long time. When you come to the central part of the state in Columbus and Southwest, where we have the newer generation of Latinos, those are mostly of Mexican heritage, and they're still fairly recent arrivals. So it's quite a mix of the well-established Hispanic community and the recent arrivals, and trying to figure out a good means to reach out to all of those has been quite an interesting challenge. So in speaking about the partners, very early on, we joined the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition. And this is a statewide coalition that has been formed to try to channel resources, outreach material, communications, and to really coordinate efforts as far as how we are reaching out to all populations with a special interest on the hard to count communities. So I most definitely encourage you to find such an entity within your state and try to work together with them, because it really helps you to increase the effectiveness as far as developing materials and using these places as a hub for the information that you have. The second really important entity that has been supporting us has been NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials. We have utilized already a lot of the materials that they have on their website. We've duplicated a lot of those materials as well, and use them quite heavily on our campaigns, as well as the hotline. And I'll talk about a little bit about that in a few minutes. The Ohio Children's Defense Fund has also been very crucial in our partnership, as well as the Census Regional Office with the partnership coordinators for the Philadelphia region to whom we belong. So when we first started out this work, and this was maybe about March or April, at first our messaging was very general. You know, we kept talking about representation and how important the census was for the count and the apportionment of seats in the House of Representatives, given that Ohio is at risk of losing some seats. Then we talked a lot about the redistricting, and then we generally spoke about funding in our communities. But none of those messages were really connecting with our Hispanic community. So when we started working with some of the organizations, we first said, well, you know, this general message is just not going to fly with Latinos. So we decided instead to be more focused on the message by emphasizing the children. And we know that all of our families care deeply about children. And so instead of having that very general message, we have been working very hard on emphasizing our children and our young people, our Latinx community. And that has really sparked a lot more goodwill within the different organizations and partners in the community. Going back as to the strategy and how we wanted to implement this. So through the summer months, we knew that there would be different festivals and events that would be happening around the state. And we started our outreach campaign by trying again to use a very general message. However, in August, we have a major Latino festival here in Columbus, Ohio, that attracts over 100,000 people. And that's when we decided that we would launch our campaign with that specific interest for niños, for our children. And so that was a really great success because we were able to attract the attention of all audiences. And we found out that really speaking about children provided a fairly neutral space, which we could use to talk to, you know, documented or undocumented children born here or born overseas. No matter what, they all know that we had that common thread of children. The next theme that we talked about was schools. Why? Because the schools and funding is going to be affected, of course, by this. And in that space, we talked a lot about the Latinx community and those students that are already in universities and colleges and student loans and all these issues of importance to them. And then we moved on to talk about transportation and housing. So by focusing on those things that are almost like the day-to-day things that people can correlate to, then we were able to get more interest from the community. How we built our partnership base is we started out, again, launching this big event at the Latino Festival, which gave us an opportunity to touch a lot of people. And then we launched another initiative that was focused specifically on faith leaders. And in that meeting, we invited many of those leaders to come together to recognize and to try to answer some of their questions, but to customize a message that they could deliver from the pulpit and trying to create a support system with each other. After we completed that in late summer, then we are getting ready to launch another set of meetings with Latino nonprofits and points of contact in the different regions and communities. And again, the message is driven and shaped around our children and our Latinx community. And once we open up the space of the conversation through those, then we're able to touch on some of the other really important and critical factors. A figure that we keep sharing with everybody, regardless of the audience, is how much Ohio will lose for every person that is not counted. And so when you do the simple math of, you know, $1,200 per person not counted, and we start sharing that information and translating it into how it is affecting the Latino communities, then suddenly there's a different sense of interest because that makes it real. And we're finding that that strategy is really helping us quite a bit. The other thing that we're doing besides these campaigns that we are launching is building a database of all the complete count committees across the state. And because I work with the Latino Affairs Commission, so we happen to have commissioners that are scattered through the major Latino concentration areas around the state. And so these commissioners have actually gone in person and met either with cities or counties to make sure that they know that Latinos are interested in collaborating. And that has been a really good way of opening up goodwill with these different groups. We have connected our list of Latino elected officials. We have about 21 of those across the state with their regions as well, and letting them know what is going on in those regions and asking if they would be willing to be, you know, we call them the census surrogates. You know, go out there and start speaking to your people and trying to engage them in building a little bit of a sense of security and certainty, because definitely they're quite scared. And then the other thing that we are working on in regards to building the strategy is going very short term and not overwhelming them with asking them to plan for, you know, from now until the count. So earlier on, we did summer months. Then during Hispanic Heritage Month, we did a big push of information during the Hispanic Heritage Month. And now we're asking them to concentrate on Navidad and Dia de los Reyes Magos, you know, Christmas and Reyes Magos days. We know that those are days when there's going to be good concentration of activities and leaders and community members. And so we are trying to channel as much information as we possibly can to those leaders around the state. We're doing like template PowerPoint presentations, if that is an option, if not a lot of flyers, just trying to get the word out. And then most recently, we are going to be working with the statewide Latino media outlets to try to together create a campaign that they will be carrying on and trying to interview trusted voices in the community throughout their channels to make sure that we build that goodwill that is so necessary in the community. To everybody who has a question and they're too afraid to ask, we've been referring people to the NALEO hotline. That bilingual hotline is a great blessing for our community. The 877 El Censo is a number that we feel is very useful to us, because many times in these open settings, people will not want to share about what's going on. And yet, when you give them the card that has those numbers, you see that they are keeping the card and they're sharing that information around. So we feel that that is a really great and useful tool that we have so far for us. Our efforts will continue between December, January, and February. We will be doing trips around the state, just again, convening leaders and trying to encourage them to continue to use this information and materials as well, and trying to build door-to-door trusted voices, conversations in smaller groups and in houses and such, to convey the purpose of the census, and again, how children and their young adults will be impacted seriously if the census count is not done. So that's a general overview of what we are doing here in Ohio. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Lily, for being able to be on and talk about your on-the-ground experience in Ohio. And then also, I'm hoping you might be able to stay on through our Q&A portion and see if there are any questions specifically for you and around what happened in Ohio that folks might want to learn from today.
Sure.
Perfect. So as we get started on the Q&A portion, I want to let everyone know, I see that there's one question already, but there is a question box, has a little an icon with a little Q on it where you can write in any questions that you're having. And sorry, it looks like there's a little issue with the sound. There we go. But write in any questions that you have for us, and then we'll be happy to go ahead and answer those. And while we do that, you can take a look at this quick cheat sheet. So it includes the web link to Hágase Cantar, which Juliana and Lilleana already told you about, which is sponsored through NALEO. And also NC Child has a page about the census that is not specific to Latino children, but does talk about all things just basic facts about the census, and then also its impact on children in general, since they are so incredibly undercounted. And then also a link to the state census website, which is the spot where you can get the most generalized information about what the census is, why it matters to North Carolina, how much money is coming into the state as a result of the census count, and then also information about jobs and employment with the Census Bureau as that gets ramped up, getting ready for the April 1st, 2020 Census Day. So let's get started on this Q&A. I'm going to try again to unmute our other speakers, and hopefully it won't give us too much feedback. I see that there is a hand raised. Juan Garcia. Here, I've allowed you to talk, Juan. Could you go ahead and share your question? Hello?
Whitney, this is Juliana. I think that Juan typed out his question.
Ah, perfect. Okay, I saw this. And Lord, it looks like Juan's question is, how is it going to affect the Hispanic Latino 2020 census response rates if the Supreme Court shuts down the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, aka DACA program? So does one of our speakers want to tackle this, or I can try and speak a little bit to the DACA program?
Happy to chime in, Whitney, and then maybe Liliana can chime in from her perspective. So without a doubt, any changes to the DACA program, the potential elimination of the program, would continue to heighten the community's fear and hesitation around participating on the census. We when we go out to communities and talk to individuals about the census, that's the #1 concern, confidentiality, and what is the government going to do with my information. And I think if the DACA program were to be eliminated, those fears would be heightened, and we would have a greater job on a greater role in helping convince individuals that participating is the right thing to do. But Lilleana, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
Yes, definitely. We saw a lot of that, especially when there was the question as to the, the citizenship question. That was our testing ground for that. And really, it takes a lot of one-to-one conversations. And this is where your faith leaders in particular play a critical role in providing perspective, because our immediate reaction is to withdraw. But then when we have trusted leaders that really are able to explain what is the cost of withdrawing and what the long-term repercussion will be, then there's at least more willingness from the people to consider that this is really important to participate. But we got to really work very heavily with our trusted on-the-ground boots, In particular, I also think that besides faith leaders, those that manage the different apartment complexes, in many of those, we found some really great advocates that are proving to be very, very fundamental for us. And I think that we just need to continue to build up those bases, because definitely whether that Supreme Court decision shuts down DACA or not is going to have a huge impact.
Great, thank you both. We have another question. It's what type of 2020 census programs have you had with the high schools in Ohio? So I think that one's for you, Lilleana.
Indirectly, we are working through churches. We have not had the opportunity to go directly into high schools. However, there are some Latino organizations here in the state, like Esperanza Inc. in Cleveland, and some of the after-school programs that have actually used some of the materials that we've provided through the NALEO website and through the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition to begin those conversations with the students. And I'll be more than happy to share with you those resources of the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition. And basically what they're doing is downloading those flyers and presentations and using them with the after-school programs.
Thank you. If there are more questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. We have really set aside this time to answer any questions that you might have, so please take advantage of our speakers today. They are really wonderful resources. And I mean, if you have general questions also about the background of the census itself and the undercount of kids, I'd be happy to speak to those as well. So I'll give about 2 more minutes and see if any other questions materialize in the inbox, and if not, we might be able to give you guys back some time in your afternoons. In the meantime, while I'll give it 1 more minute for questions, I do want to let you all know that I will be sending out these slides to folks if you would like to have those. My email address is whitney@ncchild.org if you need additional information. And I'm also going to have the link to the information on the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition that Lily already spoke about. And you should also know that at the NC Child census page, the link that you see there, ncchild.org/census, that's where we're going to put the link to the recording of today's webinar if you want to refer back to it or share it with any of your colleagues. Oh, it looks like we do have 1 more question. So how is the Disclosure Avoidance System, DAS program, for the U.S. Census Bureau going to affect the household characteristics and the Hispanic Latino data at the census block level? Juliana, do you want to speak to this one, or do you want to kind of tag?
Yeah, and it's not my area of expertise, but I know that as an organization, we are looking at the impact it's going to have potentially on redistricting, the future of Latino elected officials. So it's something we're monitoring closely. Our policy research and advocacy is working on it. It is definitely on our radar, and I think we'll keep the group posted of what we find will be the impact. I think this will be particularly crucial for those groups that will start thinking about redistricting and the use of census data post-enumeration.
And I just want to add to that I haven't seen anything new that comes out. The Census Bureau is obviously continuing testing all of the changes that it's making, and I haven't seen any recent information on this, but like Lilleana said, I will send out any materials as soon as they're available, and those will be posted on the NC Child Census site. So you might want to bookmark that, as well as Hágase Contar. All right. Well, seeing no additional questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and also thank our panelists today. We appreciate you taking the time out to learn a little bit more about how we can ensure a full and accurate count of Latino residents in North Carolina. And please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions as you think back on the things that we shared today. Have a great day.